Could you imagine that, like with like teenagers? Fingerman, he's called a fingerman, wanker.
Weirdly, you got a fingerman right over there.
Well, I have got some foam fingers over there.
I just looked at that at the same time as we were talking about it. Interestingly.
Hello and welcome to Bury Our Bones with Cinema, the podcast that lives, breathes and dies classic movies, not so classic movies and everything in between. Joining me once again is the Charles Xavier to my Magneto, the wonderful Mr. Simon Keet. In today's episode we take a worrying look into the future with 2006 comic book adaptation V for Vendetta. So sit back and join us as we watch some government approved programming, try not to get nabbed by the inauspiciously named Fingerman, and finally wonder how long it took V to straighten his wig.
Deadlier than Dracula, more frightening than Frankenstein, more mesmerizing than the mummy. Bury our bones with not your average podcast.
So probably the first question to ask is, because I know that you'd never seen V for Vendetta prior to recording this episode, so what did you think?
I don't know why I'm pausing. I
was just thinking there's a pause there that I'm not quite sure what's coming after.
I think I'm still getting my head around it. I think what I should say is that I don't know why I've not seen this, but I think it might have been one of those things of I'd missed it. And then before you know it, there's this whole online community of people that, you know, I don't have an understanding of where it's come from.
Too much of a thing to kind of, it's almost like sometimes with certain things, like I know for years and years and years, people had like harked on about Doctor Who. And it'd never really been my thing. And then once I thought, I'll give it a go, I was like, well, where the fucking hell do you start? It's that thing of where there's so much out there. There's so much stuff. It's like, it's almost a bit of an unbearable task. I don't think it's quite there, but I get what you're saying, because it is quite a beloved film. And
well, yeah, I think I guess I didn't know what to expect. And I was like, I wonder if it's like a trendy movie where it's all quite cool. Like, I wonder if it was like a sort of dark movie that has some gritty scenes in it, because I know Natalie Portman's quite good at like gritty things like that. But what I didn't expect was Natalie Portman to have a similar accent to Padme Amidala in this. There's quite a sort of
it does feel very much like the director went, Natalie, why are you doing? Do Padme,
you know? And which I was really liked, by the way.
And I actually think it's a really good accent. Like, there's a couple of moments where it's kind of a little bit like, is that how an English woman would say that? But generally speaking,
I think for this,
it's quite easy to buy her as an English woman.
It feels like a weird time. It's set in it's set in 2020, isn't it?
Yeah, it's set in the near future. Obviously, at the time, in 2006, when it came out, it was set in a near future. So, obviously, do they actually state what year it is? I don't think they do. I think it's more of like a general kind of time.
I saw online it was supposed to be 2020, but I don't know if you're right. I don't remember saying it in the movie. But with Natalie Portman's accent I have to say it doesn't feel like Bridget Jones level of like, I'm fully in England. And I think it sort of adds to the sort of weirdness of the world a bit, that it doesn't quite really feel like English.
Yeah, I mean, everything about it is just, particularly for those in England, everything's just a bit off. It's a bit sort of, it is English, but it isn't English at the same time. I think part of that is they filmed the vast majority of it in Berlin. The Berlin, there's a famous Berlin movie studio over there, but the streets of Berlin is where they filmed a lot of it, and they obviously picked areas that could convincingly convey London, and I think that adds to the kind of, it looks like London, it looks like England, but it kind of doesn't at the same time. The only bit that is properly in London is where they do the kind of the latter stages gathering outside Parliament, not Parliament, Trafalgar Square.
I mean, that has to be there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think of this? Like, have you seen this a long time ago, or what's
it's really hard to describe for me, because I do love this film, but trying to encapsulate what is quite difficult. I feel like it's a case of, like we often say, when you watch it and how it makes you feel when you watch it for the first time. So this is a film that, mid 2000s it came out, and it came out just at the time that I started getting into film. So I was starting to collect DVDs, starting to, not always watch what my parents would watch. I'm now making my own decisions on, okay, I'm going to watch this film, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And I think this is one of the ones where there was a 2-disc edition DVD that came out. And I was like, oh yeah, that film, that the imagery on that DVD cover looks cool. I wouldn't have been necessarily following it when it came out in terms of, it's at the cinema, because I'd have been 14. So
is it around a similar time to like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? Because I've just had that.
So League of
Extraordinary, like
yeah. Well, it's funny you should make that, and I don't know if you've made the connection, because there is a connection.
Oh,
they're both. So the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was 2002, this is 2006. They're both based on comics which were written by Alan Moore. So there's the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is one. From Hell is another one. V for Vendetta is another one, and Watchmen are all based on Alan Moore comics. And
he's good, isn't he?
He is good. However, he does have a problem with pretty much all of his, because there's a reason why in the credits he's not mentioned, because he basically said, I don't want to be associated with this film, because it does have some quite big differences, certainly in his eyes, between the comic and the film. So in the comic book, V is more of an anarchist, and it's more about creating chaos, and it's coming at it from that point of view, rather than it being, a fighting for freedom type of, aspect. So it's interesting you made the link there
without knowing. I really didn't know. I grew up, had that one on DVD, saw it at the cinema, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and it sort of stuck with me. And that's a film, a bit like you, that I like it, but I'm not prepared to. I don't think I'd be able to back it up with words.
Oh yeah, it's a terrible film, but it's a terrible film that I enjoy every time I watch it.
Yeah, but this, you don't think this is?
No, this V for Vendetta is a great film. Objectively, it's great. It's not even one of those things like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is. It's really difficult to put your finger on why it's bad.
It's just a bit cack, isn't it?
Yeah, but I can't. It's like some films you can go, well, here's a list of reasons why this film is rubbish. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen I find difficult to do that, and I still enjoy it watching it. So yeah, the links are there, but I think even without those links, for me, and perhaps it does go back to the fact that they're based on the same comic book writer, but it's a time capsule sort of thing of where the sort of early to mid noughties had these films that had very kind of vivid kind of worlds that it was in, and probably because they are based on the comic, I think this world is a lot more interesting than the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I think that was more, it felt universal horror-esque, because it had the Invisible Man, it had Jekyll and Hyde.
It felt a bit like when they tried to reboot that whole thing. Not that, but do you remember they tried to make that Mummy be part of a Dark World franchise that was just
which is a shame, because I really want that. I would like a universe.
Yeah, for sure.
A Dark World universe, but unfortunately they decided to do it with the Mummy, which
we'd already had a great version of with Brendan Fraser.
Like, if you want to do it, then just set it in the world that Brendan Fraser's Mummy's. That would be the easiest option to do, because everybody loves those two films. Not so much the Scorpion King, but the Mummy and the Mummy Returns. Tomb of the Dragon Emperor is a bit iffy.
Scorpion King was the first ever 12A I ever saw. Or
Yeah.
No, sorry, the first ever 12.
I think it may have been the first ever 12A.
I don't know if it was just a 12 though. I think it was it might have been the first 15 I saw or something. We'll find out at one point. Maybe we'll do this.
Well, interestingly, I'm just looking over at the case. It does say 12 on it.
Yeah, I think it was the first 12 I saw at 11 or
Fair
something
enough.
at a cinema.
Yeah, 2001. So that came out, but it would probably 2002 over here. I think it came out end of the year 2001.
And I was 1992, so I guess it was a bit. And I saw it at cinema.
Yeah, interesting.
With my mum, and it was great. So to me, that's another good one. The Scorpion King.
Yeah.
But so what I tell you, Ryan, is this. After I watched it, I was very straight away online trying to understand V's backstory. So it worked. Whatever happened, I'm not convinced of the necessary. I have to watch it. I want to watch it again, weirdly. So it must be good, but it was not what I was expecting because I've heard a lot of different things. There's all this other stuff come out of it. I was very surprised when he started getting all Zorro on everyone's butts, with all the flying knives and stuff and all the throwing. But I have to say, it really is him as a character with how he plays everything. He really is great in this. I guess you know what I was expecting? I was expecting a Natalie Portman heavy movie where she's but to be honest, maybe it's just obvious to anyone, but it really is. You look forward to him being on screen in this.
Yeah, well, I think probably if going into it, if you don't necessarily know much about it, you wouldn't necessarily know that V is a character name. V for Vendetta just sounds like a pithy, cool sounding name, doesn't it? But if it's actually, when you look at the name of it and you go, oh, V is in the person V is on a vendetta, or in that regard.
I think because she shaved her head for this movie, I thought this is some serious, deep Natalie Portman acting, and she does get those moments in where she's captured by.
I can see how,
but I guess I was not expecting.
I mean, I can see how if you hadn't seen it and you going into it, it could feel a little bit like one of those Oscar kind of bait type films.
That's what I thought.
Natalie Portman shaved her head, so she's obviously going for an Oscar. That type of thing. So I can see that quite,
and I'm
quite
happy
easily.
It wasn't that.
Yeah, and I don't think you're saying that in a way of Natalie Portman isn't good in this.
No, I like
she is.
Everything.
I think it's just it balances it quite well. I think if we'd have had a lot of focus on Natalie Portman's character, which we do to a certain extent, but it could have been a bit too heavy in that direction. The thing that everybody's intrigued about is V, so they kind of give you what you want here. It's not, you mentioned the backstory of V, and I would say, and I don't know how much it differs from the comic, and it has actually really made me want to go and get the comics and the graphic novel, because the explanation around V's backstory is a bit vague, and I don't know how much of that is, hopefully they couldn't have really been thinking about this being something that built up a sequel or have a prequel to or something like that. Maybe
it feels like there could have been more of these movies, doesn't it? This feels like first one in 3 V for Vendetta, 5 3 V for Vendetta. You know what I mean? It feels to me like a whole establishing a bit of a universe here, and you get a glimpse of it here, and it felt like you could have had more with someone else doing it next time. I don't know.
And because as I say, I think it's a bit, his backstory in this is a bit vague. They explain a couple of things, but not really at the same time.
What do you need explaining?
Well, the way they do it is almost like they're teasing something else is going to come after this film. And I don't think that was ever really the plan. So when they're explaining the experiments that they do, they don't really explain what the experiments are, other than they're just experimenting, looking for the ideal candidate. But it doesn't really go into what they're actually trying to do and why they're trying to do it.
From a quick online search afterwards, because I needed a bit more enlightened on it. I thought, maybe it didn't sink in or not, or they just didn't explain it in enough detail. But I think that they from my understanding, they were developing like a virus at that I forgot what it's called, the location.
Oh, Lark House.
Lark House.
Yeah.
And then
actually, now you've said that, it does. I actually do know.
And then they actually end up using, and that creates V, but then who's in cell number 5, Roman numeral, and then they actually go on to use that virus on their own people and like minorities in England.
Now you said that, I think I just must have missed it rewatching it, because that makes total sense now. So I do take back what I just. The only thing I suppose,
I don't know if it explained it that deeply though. I feel
no,
like
it doesn't. It doesn't. I think where perhaps my ever so slight criticism is doesn't quite explain, because there is sort of like this insinuation that V gets sort of superhuman powers in some regard. Doesn't quite explain how or what, or
it's this toss up between he is a superhero in a very sort of gritty, realistic-y world, and it's this thing that the film has to juggle, and it feels like it's still quite hard to get your head around the fact he's like Zorro.
And as I say, I think that is the only thing where I really kind of looked at it and went, okay, so he's got these superhuman powers, but hasn't really explained how. Like, it wasn't like, it could have been a line said here or there where, his reaction to the virus done something, and, it doesn't really do that. You just kind of, that there's an accident at the Lark House facility, and then he comes out and you see he's obviously covered in burns and whatnot. And then obviously towards the end where he's getting shot at, he's wearing a what's his name, steel plate.
He's doing
but there was a lot of bullets flying
doing
around.
A fistful of dollars.
Yeah.
Right there. He definitely is, like how quick he is. I mean, some of the super cool bits in this is where like he's gagged everyone, put masks on him when he takes over the TV channel, and then like he takes out a few people. And I actually think the combat in this movie is really cool. And there's a bit towards the end where he finally kills final boss, and he says he takes off the metal armor, and then he says I coup before you all reload, and he does, and it's all done really. It's really slow, and that bit's a bit silly. But you know what, this film, I like this in the same way that I like Underworld. I mean, what we'll get to probably in a minute is this has the fun of Underworld and the sort of sometimes silliness of it, but people taking it deadly seriously in the movie, which I always quite like. But this on top of that has like, this character, that iconic mask, the whole folklore and stuff behind, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder plot and all that stuff. On top of that, he has properly random cool gadget at the beginning, doesn't he? When he puts like cement through a door or something. I don't know what happened.
It's the only time you really see a proper like gadget, isn't it? The rest of it is all very much like the film shows you, Count of Monte Cristo, 16th, 17th century style kind of thing. It's heavily influenced by that. And that bit where he puts that gun in and the concrete expands is like the only thing other than the bombs that are like very modern day that he has.
If that bit jumps out, I was like, what the hell's that? And he never really get an answer to like his gadget situation.
But I think it's probably the world more than him, because there is that gadget that the two coppers have when they're having that conversation in the office, where obviously it just scrambles the listening devices and whatnot. So I think that's what I mean, where it's like the world is, and what I do like about it, even though I have made a criticism about not explaining how V became V really, what I like about it is that it doesn't do a lot of explaining. It doesn't do, like, oh, we've got this little gadget. Well, how does that work? What is this world that we live in? It's kind of just, it's very, very close to being something that's really, really easy to identify with, but also so far away at the same time.
Yeah, and So it's a good movie and it's like action and stuff. And what I mean to say as well is that it has this whole like future predicting thing of like, you know, they've clearly had lockdowns. You know, if this is set in 2020, it's mental. You know, it's clearly got curfew still from like, I assume
if it is set in 2020, that's like proper fucking eerie.
Yeah, and I think like, you know, it's very like it's really, sometimes it's a bit on the nose about it, but it's very relevant really. And the you know, the fact that she goes out on curfew right at the beginning, I was like, oh my god, it's like lockdown curfew. Like I felt a bit like, I don't know that many words of V, but I was spouting some stuff like him when we had the lockdowns.
Well, I think this is a film that is even more relevant today, and you know, we're not going to get onto politics in this podcast, but it is eerily similar to some things that we can look out the window and look in the paper and look online at some of the shit that's happening in our world, where at this sort of time it was almost a bit of a warning, and it was a bit of a, you know, a case study and saying this is what happens, you know, obviously taking a lot of influences from like Nazi Germany and things like that, even to the point where they change from the comic books the Prime Minister's name. In the comic books, I think he's called Adam Susan, but in here he's called Adam Sutler because it sounds a bit more like Hitler.
I think with this, I did feel, I guess I never believed fully, if I'm honest. I never really, I would have liked to shown more of how run down the world is, because I assume being an average Joe, you know, has got a normal job in this world is pretty rubbish. Like in England, I assume that's the case. And it always looks, whenever you see the actual people of England, they're generally just watching. It sort of shows you those moments through. It does it a bit like RoboCop with news stuff all the time. You know, that's when it gives you a bit of world building. But RoboCop does those things better. Like RoboCop, you really feel like the world is rubbish. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know if the world isn't as rubbish in this, but I think it could have done a bit more. But at the same time, it doesn't. I didn't really care. Do you know what I liked.
I think what I would say probably in challenging of that is that here the rubbishness of the world is in a different way. So in RoboCop, it's very much there's poverty, there's crime, and the reason RoboCop has to exist is because people have lost control. Whereas here, I think it's the other way, where life is presented as being safe, secure, but actually your freedoms have been taken away.
You are right.
You can watch TV whenever you want. Yeah, but it's government approved television. It's scripts that have been approved by the government. You can't go and look at art anymore because it's not been approved by the government. But you can go and look at art. You know what I mean? It's all very. It's like the. I can't think what they call it. It's like the drip effect.
It's a bit more like a 1984 universe, isn't it? And it feels a bit more like that.
And obviously the parallels are quite easy to see when you've got John Hurt playing, you know, the opposite of what he was playing in 1984. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is the idea that, you know, you make small increments and changes, and by the time you get to, you know, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, you're going, hang on a minute, how did I get to this stage? And it's because slowly things have changed.
We've still not left the house and there's no virus anymore.
Yeah, it's
definitely. That's the thing.
You know, it's not a big change. It's not right when, you know, it's not, for example, just to make the links to code. It's not all of a sudden we're not allowed out. It's, starting with, you are allowed out, but we wouldn't advise you to go to these areas.
Yeah.
And then it's, we wouldn't advise you to go to these areas between 11 and 12. And then it's, you can't go to these areas at all. And then it's, you know, and it's very easy for humanity to go, well, that's a small change. That's not going to make a difference to me. But it leads to, you know, bigger and more control. And I think that's one of the criticisms that Alan Moore had about it, is that it comes from from a freedom fighter point of view,
I see.
and he really kind of disliked that. He said that this, it should have been set in America because it's that kind of neoliberalism, and the neoliberalism is kind of the message and the thought of it, whereas in the comic books, not that I can say because I haven't read them, but it's more of a chaotic and a chaos point of view. It's more of a disruption point of view, rather than it being, this is wrong, we have to do this for our freedom.
He does feel like a bit like an old school hero in this movie, and I like that about it because he really likes to Count of Monte Cristo, doesn't he? I've not read that or seen that movie, to be fair, so I might not be getting that reference. I might not understand fully that reference until I dive deep into Count of Monte Cristo. But there's a reason he likes that movie, and what it mostly shows from that is it's the ending, and that he gets to Count of Monte Cristo, he wins a battle, and he gets the woman, and in this, he's sort of saying he can't have both, I think, but I don't know. I mean, I think it sort of hints that he watches lots of movies, because he does the same trick that Clint Eastwood does in Fistful of Dollars with a metal jacket. And I mean, I think I wouldn't even be surprised if he's learnt his martial arts from watching films. I was trying to work out how's he learnt to be this good at stuff. It's like, has he had a lot of time on his own? Was he trained? Was he someone that was, there's all these theories online of, someone said, is he the ex-lover of Stephen Fry character in this, because Stephen Fry makes the toast with the egg in the middle, and it's not really explained, but he could have been the guy that his boyfriend or something that was taken away, or something like that. Because
that's a good point that I'd never really thought about.
There's people think, could he be the loose one? But there's the idea I thought, is he going to be V's?
And the way they catch him is because of the eggy bread.
Yeah, is he going to be Evie's dad, or is he? Could he have been someone that was a military person initially? That's why he's so good at fighting. Or this sort of CGI of him walking out of the flames, and that is a bit goofy looking. But I like it.
It's of its time, isn't it? I think one of the things that I do appreciate with some of the, from the practical perspectives, is they used miniatures when they were blowing up. Parliament rather than CGI, because it would have been a lot easier to do CGI, absolutely. And I think, mixture of CGI and practical effects, I think just about works here. But yeah, it does look, I wouldn't say ropey, but you can definitely tell it's CGI.
I feel like now stuff that's CGI and it's aged a bit is starting to add a little bit of vibe, a bit like the stop motion in RoboCop. Sorry to mention RoboCop again, but like the stop.
Right, do you want to do RoboCop?
I feel like the stop motion in that on the mech thing in there. It's not a mech. It's a everyone knows the robot that kills everyone in that movie.
Yeah.
Who's not RoboCop?
I think it is a mech. I think that's how it's referred to.
Fair. Well, it's a stop motion they use on that. It adds vibe to the movie, and I feel like I actually felt like the CGI on the fire.
Yeah, I feel
actually added a bit of coolness.
I feel like we get to a point where there is charm about things when it's not great. Sometimes, Hannah is usually the person who, if it looks rubbish, it's rubbish, rather than it looks rubbish, but that's why it's cool, because it's a bit ropey and it's a bit, the classic one for me is the Terminator head in the Terminator. It doesn't really look like, it looks like a faint, clay version of Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2025. It looks ropey, but that's the charm of it for me.
Yeah,
the charm of it is nice. The fact it looks a bit ropey, like what you're saying with RoboCop. And I've probably, there probably will be films that we watch 20, 30 years time where we're probably saying the same thing, as opposed to now when we're just saying that CGI looks terrible.
Because it's I think here it's because the idea behind, probably find out it's not CGI now, but I'm pretty sure it's some, but the thing is, it sticks with you, the image of him coming out the flames with no face, no eyes, and what happened to him,
especially when it's reflected in the eyes of the Doctor.
Yeah, it really does stick with you. And I absolutely love this character, V. I really, really I'm glad I've finally seen this. I love his lair. I feel like you'd like his lair. Do you like his lair?
Well, I think that's the key thing. It's a lair, isn't it?
Yeah.
It feels very much like this secret lair.
He's a bit similar. The more and more I think about it, he's quite similar to the Stephen Fry character, isn't it? He's got loads of old stuff in the back. Stephen Fry has all that old stuff in the back.
Stephen Fry says, "You've got it, Evey. I am V." Maybe Stephen Fry is V in a past life, or because the old the kind of biggest, well, not biggest, but one of the big themes in this is obviously the fact that the mask isn't just covering up the fact that he's got horrific burns. The mask is there as a symbol, as an idea. It's a lot harder to kill an idea than it is to kill a man. And so the fact that he has a mask is symbolic of the fact that anybody could be V and put on the mask and fight for what V is suggesting you fight for. You become V. And I think that's one of the themes there. So whilst I'm not actually saying that Stephen Fry is V, but I think the point I'm making is that there is a little bit of V in everybody. There is a little bit of defiance. There is a little bit of, us, how far we push it. Obviously, V's gone to the extreme. Stephen Fry has gone a little bit extreme with his secret, artwork and stuff like that. But there's probably an element in all of the people in this world where they're going, they have a little bit of, the character that V creates when Evey is held hostage in inverted commas. She is defiant in her own way. She's defiant because, she's living a free, lesbian life without fear, but there is a fear, but without caution, essentially. So I think there's that element of pushing against what is being pushed on you.
That was a great bit when she kept reading the note that V had also read and got him through his experience. This woman that was in this movie, like I liked that little sort of a quick subplot, and it was a bit like every time she'd like get tortured, which is actually by V. And then she'd go back to reading that note that was in the little I was totally fooled, by the way. I didn't think that he was doing it to her. I was totally thought she was captured.
There is an element, if you're looking for a plot hole, how would she not know that it's V? Because he's either wearing the mask, in which case, hi V, or he's not wearing the mask, but he's covered in...
I don't think she sees his face, though. He's always in the dark.
She would have seen his face because she gets her head shaved in bright light.
Yeah, but doesn't he have isn't he covered? I'm sure he's covered up.
He's not covered. You never see his face in terms of the camera shot.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't. He has gloves on.
But maybe there's no mirror in there. I don't think there was a mirror in
there. Maybe, but for me, I was just going, there was an awful lot of time where I'm like, yeah, okay, when she's in the cell and he's standing in the shadow, yeah. But there's points where she's coming out of that room. And so if you're looking for a plot hole, you could probably find it there. But on your point about that story, that was one of the things that really stuck with me after I watched, the film. And it's the thing that I always remember coming back to more than anything is that story. Because if you take that out of it, doesn't necessarily become a worse film, but there isn't necessarily a heart to it. There isn't because as much as we could sympathise with V's character, he is doing a lot of stuff where it's quite questionable. The fact that he takes her hostage in the first instance because he had to make a decision very quickly is slightly questionable. The fact that he then takes her hostage again, and this time, doesn't obviously treat her very well, shaves her head. I'm not going to say tortures her, but definitely interrogates her.
Yeah.
She's
very
questionable. This is supposed to be somebody who he has a lot of
she
love and
trusts
respect
him at this
for.
point, I think, really. Actually, no, she doesn't trust him at this point. She actually double-crossed him a bit.
Yeah.
That's a dodgy scene, isn't it? That's quite hard to watch with the pedo priest.
It is,
and
because there is an
Natalie-
element of you're going, like, right, how far is this going to go?
That is
a lot of stuff in this is kind of insinuation and implication. I think that's probably the only time where we really kind of start to see the nastiness of the world, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, I would, the news reporter who is, one of V's first victims, how on the nose that is, because that, to me, watching all of those bits, it does just feel like a little bit of GB News, and I'm not even saying that as an ironic kind of, oh, that's a bit funny. It does genuinely feel a little, like it could be on GB News. In a world where the reins have been taken off slightly, it's not too much of a push.
I would say, more like a Fox News of like these pundits that, like they said, he's like the voice of London at some point in this. Like he is. I mean, he's an interesting character. He's got like TV screens in his shower, and he's saying he's practicing,
totally in love with himself,
and he's like. He's like, oh, this guy
doesn't know how to like me. My nose looks like the size of Big Ben.
Yeah, the men in this are generally quite horrible, aren't they? From the beginning, men that are gonna rape her at the beginning. They're horrible, obviously. The present, the people that went along with that, the priest was involved in that. Oh, what is it? Lark House, and the scientific stuff there. And it's really dark. Like they're at that point they're capturing like gay people and minorities, I think. And there is a real darkness to underneath it all. I don't know if it's necessarily explored like enough really in this, but I think what I really felt like with this, like what we mentioned a bit earlier, is that it felt like it was the start of a franchise of things that this world could have been explored more. I think if there was a sequel, I think there are things you could have gone into a bit more.
I think you could probably do a trilogy where there is Evey in every film.
Could just be Natalie Portman in number 2.
It could be, but I feel like this kind of thing would work where there are different people taking on the persona of V, because it's the idea of it being a symbol more than anything. I think you're going back to what you were saying about the men in this are quite, deplorable. The only real men in here who are, it sounded like I was about to say the only real men here. No, but the only men here who are not questionable in a direct sense are the two police officers, coppers.
I have to say here, Ryan, I'll probably change when I come back to watching it, but I was a bit snooze fest on the cop bits, and it's so like it's like
you just don't like police procedural office things, do you?
What's
you
funny?
said the same about no,
that was you.
We both said that. I'm not taking full responsibility.
No, I thought in Dirty Harry 1 that the police scenes were quick enough to get through, but I actually felt it was a similar thing in this, in terms of like they feel like they're in another movie. Like he feels like he's on like an ITV drama, that cop, and I like the actor and everything, but I don't know if he's got much to go by. I don't know if he's got much to go on. They're generally just on the trail, and he doesn't really have any action scenes or anything, does he? Which I think he could have done.
No,
he doesn't meet Evey till right at the end, and he goes, "Are you Evey?" Do you know what I mean? That's on the last bit, and I think if I had any criticisms of this movie, I would have just given him a bit more to do, I think.
See, I actually really like that element. I think kind of what you were saying earlier about there is a lot of nasty, dark undertones here, and it could be very, very heavy. Like it's very difficult to talk about this film without being political, and I don't want to get political because this is supposed to be a fun, fun podcast. And when you get political, it's very difficult to be fun. And I feel like this film has to have those elements just to kind of give you a bit of a break from thinking about this horrible stuff going on.
I think he's slowly, what I kind of what I kind of thought about it afterwards is that although not much exciting stuff happens for our policeman in this, our detective, you can see he's done a good job, because you can slowly, even though he's not really showing it by any actions really until the end, he is slowly sort of thinking, actually, this isn't the system is all rigged and everything, and there's a bit in the room when he asks his other detective mate, who I thought was going to double cross him, but that, you see what I mean, that could have happened. He could have been double crossed or something. But there's a bit in that room where he goes, he can't leave this room, but what if it was our government that launched this virus on our, killed, it's hurting its own people and stuff? Is that a question you would want to know the answer to? Or, I want to ask, I've forgotten, but I felt like I was like, oh, this is the point where he said too much. Someone's going to try and snuff him out. His guy's going to tell on him, because everyone's, that guy's too buried in the system. And, this guy has a good moral compass underneath him. He's just a classic old school detective. He just wants the justice. But no, he wasn't.
There wasn't. Yeah, I mean, his kind of, his story arc and his plot line is very kind of by the numbers. It doesn't really get much more than just trying to figure out what's going on. And I think I quite like that, because of the reason I said earlier, and also because he's almost like that he's guiding the audience. So that you could argue, yeah, but perhaps a little bit like we said for Dirty Harry, and also other things like it. He is kind of perhaps a little bit exposition-y, where he's simply saying what the audience might be thinking and just going, oh, we're going down this avenue now in terms of the plot line. So that's kind of the purpose of his character in terms of a narrative structure. But I think what I like about him is that he, at the beginning you're questioning whether or not he's part of this regime, because obviously he's the detective, and he turns up to those, dark room meetings with the Prime Minister and the
classic massive face on the wall,
very big brother-esque, isn't it? So you question those kind of things, and you question whether or not he's part of that regime, and then you start to see that actually no, he's quite an intelligent, astute detective, and actually he manages to put all the pieces together with virtually no information, other than a couple of blurbs here and there on these, background files of the people who are involved in Lark House.
I get the impression as well, as he's a bit older, he's the kind of guy that would tell you in a pub that, to be honest, mate, I voted left, I voted blue and red for the last 30 years, and there ain't been any change. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't believe any of these guys anymore. He's that kind of guy, and I feel like he's just a bit disillusioned at the ages. He's obviously seen, maybe there was more crime and stuff before. This he's a conservative leader, actually, funnily enough, in this, isn't he? And this political leader is who is, it's no longer a democracy. Clearly, I think he's rigged elections and stuff since. I feel like he's been around for a while to seen this sort of unfold, and he's starting to question if what is true they're telling them and everything. So I think he definitely is the right person for the job, with the age of the actor and how serious he looks and stuff. And just having it on in the background now, like just the contrast between how warm and lovely it is in all the scenes with V in his lair, and it feels like a whole, like, you feel like you're in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen world of like comic book world. Then it cuts back to the police cop, detective inspector, and do you know what I mean? It feels like he's in another movie, just the lighting of how it all looks. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I just think the world he inhabits is cold and horrible.
Well, I think that's kind of the point, isn't it? They're in different worlds, but albeit they're in the same metaphysical place. But in terms of their ideologies and their perspectives, they're in two totally different worlds. V is very much an idealist and somebody who, is very much influenced by art and literature and emotion, whereas the detective Stephen Ree is very much very much cold, hard facts. Go, okay, well, here's what I'm being told to do. Here's what I'm doing. Here's why I'm doing it. And I think as this kind of film goes on, it's the merging of those kind of worlds.
And the only reason he's managed to get to V is the truth. Like his cold, hard facts brought him to the truth. And where does the truth lead? To V and his lair and culture and coolness and vibe and sort of, books.
He does definitely feel like the sort of detective who would say, which you've probably heard in most procedural detective, dramas, by a straight-laced cop is go, all you have to do is follow the evidence.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, follow the evidence, you'll find the truth. He feels like that kind of character.
You don't see his house or where he comes from or you don't really know why he is the way he is or anything.
In some ways, he is just as much of an idea and a symbol as V is, albeit a different one. He's very much this person who is, he is a representative of the government, and I suppose in some ways he's the ideal kind of explanation, or what everybody thinks of a good government should be. It's him, whereas obviously he's working for a government where it's not that at all. All he's doing is following the facts, trying to get to the truth. He could get V, he could, take Evey in once they get to him, but he doesn't, because he knows what they're doing in some way is right. He knows that the world that we live in, and obviously he's found out what the government has done. He knows that what they done was wrong, and actually something needs to change. So he allows that to happen.
The character that, so out of like the, it's like 4 horsemen apocalypse situation. I don't say more than 4, but there's there's quite a lot of characters in this, weirdly, like the police cop, the pedo priest who's grim, the guy that gets killed first, who is like the sort of Piers Morgan of London, but worse, obviously. But one of them I actually find really interesting, I think might be the fully fleshed out character, is the lady that she just happens to she does just happen to be a coroner. The police the detective just to go see. So I was just speaking to her, and it's like, oh really? But I find her storyline really interesting, because she sort of sees the first one and go, I thought what we were doing was right. I thought about killing myself. What we did was so bad. And she received I loved the bit she receives a flower that day from the detective, and he leaves these on the body, and she feels like, oh, it's fate that I received this flower today. And then he gets to say that thing again, like, oh, there are no things such as fate or whatever. It's all just, there's no such thing as coincidence. It's all fate. Whatever his spiel is about that, which I sort of really do subscribe to, really. But I think she's really cool because she sort of shows that what they were up to was really bad.
Well, I think she is probably she's probably the most realistic character in here, from the sense of, how do I word this? So I think there are an awful lot of people who are doing questionable things, but they're either A, doing them for the right reasons, or B, are doing them for reasons where they're not sure, let me rephrase, they're doing it without knowing what the real reasons behind it is. So i.e., I'm looking into this particular thing because I'm trying to find a cure for this disease. What I don't know is that people have actually funded this project because they want to find the ultimate disease. She is the conscience of, the world in which we're in. She's the one who kind of accepts, okay, she could kill herself, but it's almost like she says, I could have killed myself. I thought about it many times, but I knew one day you would come.
Yeah.
And it's almost a thing of her saying, well, I could kill myself, but that would be, what is my punishment?
Yeah.
My punishment is knowing one day he will come for me. That's the punishment.
Death cut. Yeah. I like this idea that he says in it that, a cause and effect idea is like and she calls him out on it, but he explains this concept that I can't explain right now. But then, then she says, "Oh yeah," she goes, "What they did to me was monstrous," and she's like, "Oh yeah," and they created a monster, and he's like, huh. Because that's his own sort of logic. And then towards the end of the movie, he's like, "No, you were actually right. I am a monster," because what he did to her was unjustifiable, really. I'm sure there's a better way of ridding her of fear than sort of torturing her and keeping her locked away and think she's going to die. But I think I like this idea in the movie that everything you do has sort of repercussions. You can treat someone monstrously, you create a monster that will kill you. And I think that I like that theme in this film.
Yeah. I mean, you have it with Stephen Fry's character as well, don't you? Where he pushes the boundaries of his TV show. He goes against the censor-approved script, and as a result, he gets black bagged and he's taken away. You don't really know what happened. Well,
he actually is just killed. Yeah,
he's killed. Yeah, but you never see it, so you don't really know what happened to him. And I think that's kind of the point. It's almost a thing of a bit like with the story when Evey's in, being held hostage, taken away, but you never really know what happens to them. You presume they're dead, and they probably are dead, but you never really know what happens to them. And I think that's the point. It's almost like you're just wiped off and there's no history of you, like what they're doing with all of the art and the literature and, all of those things. They're just wiping it from history. Doesn't exist.
Yeah, he says at the beginning, doesn't he? I don't want to hear that music again. That song he plays like a symphony at the beginning, and he goes, "I'll never that."
Yeah, add that to the band list, isn't it?
And it's the prison that she's in, which I'm sure he has based that on prison that he grew up in or that he experienced himself. Like he's just made a mock up of something he's experienced. I'm pretty sure it's very much like when I was 16 or 15. How old are you in year like 9 or 10? And I went on the German
13,
trip
14,
and we went to East Berlin and we went to the Stasi.
We did, yeah.
Did you go, Ryan?
Yeah.
It was me, you.
We were in the same room, mate.
Oh, God.
Thanks for remembering.
I added you to the blacklist.
Yeah.
I was like...
You bastard.
Well, do you remember then?
Get rid of him.
Do you remember... And did you ever watch the movie that is set there? It's really good. It's called In das Leben of Others or something. It's In the Lives of Others. It's a great film.
No, but I need to watch it.
I
need to watch it, yeah.
The gritty end to this movie, basically. Yeah. That whole prison scene. And me and you, we went to that. Sorry, Ron. I remember wholeheartedly now. I
never thought on this podcast I'd find out that you've totally wiped me from your memory.
God. I mean... Sad, we had another friend as well in our room, didn't we?
We did, yeah. He was a top geezer.
Top
that guy,
geezer, and but yeah, did you get that prison? To me, was just like because she also another cool thing, like when she's written the note, the lady that lived the lesbian life and was punished for it, she wrote that life story on a scrap of toilet paper, and she said, I can't believe I'd ever write my only thing I've ever written is on a bit of toilet paper. It's so grim, that, actually. But she says, when she says, I can't, I don't know how I'll be able to explain to you that this isn't just something the guards are doing to trick you, because it shows that whatever sort of place she was, is that the guards there would trick the inmates, and that's something they'd actually did in East Berlin. And I remember that they'd have this. They had this light system. They used to make people think that they were the only people in the whole prison, but they weren't, and stuff like that. And they'd actually trick them. And if they'd knock on the walls, sorry, it's just dark, but if they'd knock on the walls to communicate with other people, the guards would also knock to trick them, or they'd be actually talking to a guard. And I feel like there's enough little. It might be because we've been there and we've seen that a bit in that what's now a museum, but it feels like there's enough little comments in this that allude to what you can work out yourself. I think just from that scrap of that little storyline and the scrap of toilet paper autobiography thing. I thought that was all quite, and it felt very gritty. That felt like Natalie Portman doing some good acting. Did you feel that?
Yeah, for me. I can't speak positively enough of of that entire kind of plot line, because I think it's something that it's really hard to manufacture emotion in films to really, make people feel something without it being kind of force fed. And I think the line that really sticks with me is towards the end of Autobiography. And I'm going to paraphrase it somewhat, but when she says, I want you to know that even though I will never know you, I will never see you, I will never kiss you, I will never touch you, I want you to know that I love you. And I think that that's such a poignant thing to kind of say. And unfortunately, it does have those big connotations to those, horrific things that happened in World War II. And, the things that we were, able to learn about in East Berlin. And I think the parallels, the fact that they filmed the vast majority of this in Berlin, where, that part of the world is so, I was about to say used to, but that's not the right phrase, but they have experienced that type of propaganda and that type of emotional torment and behaviour. And
is that a conscious decision while they filmed it in Germany?
I don't think it was a conscious decision in that respect. I think it was more they couldn't film it in London.
Yeah.
For the most part, and they had to find somewhere, and they thought that Berlin was enough aesthetically to look like how they wanted it to look. So, but obviously that would have had some...
It would have been on their
mind.
It
would have been one of those things where you can't really get away from it, know.
And I think that, just to say, right, I think you will remember, but it was a bit later than World War II, that Stasi stuff, because it was when Russia had East Berlin. And it was a bit later. But that movie, I mean, that's definitely on a recommended watching after this, is that In the Lives of Others. But it's a subtitle, it's a dubbed movie, but it's one of those ones that definitely sticks with you. But I know we haven't got to recommended watching.
The Michael Caine Tangerine Hot Sauce Company. Available in 3 varieties of heat: mild, agitated, and ruby red. Michael Caine's Tangerine Hot Sauce. It causes a penis in the anus of Michael Cainus.
What's mental about this film is to see what that world could look like in England, like with like English talk panel hosts. And by the way, the whole Stephen Fry TV show thing, like, of course he's going down for that. That was mental.
Yeah.
Even if he did that now, I feel like, well, it's what says about what time we're living in, maybe. But that even felt a bit edgy.
Yeah, I mean, that's not getting made by the BBC,
no,
is it? Yeah,
it was like it's like it had like the Benny Hill theme playing over it as well.
Yeah.
It's quite mental.
It's one step away from that, isn't it? It is. I think it goes back to what I was saying about how it feels very British, but also very not British at the same time. Like, I think part of the way this kind of sticks with me, at the least, is the way it's so close and yet so far away from what I experience in day-to-day life. Like, it's not too much of a push to get to this world in the day that we live in now. And I'm not saying that to be political and whatever, but I think it's that thing of, post-COVID, a lot of people have a very different kind of viewpoint on things. And COVID kind of proved how, whatever side of the argument you fall on, it proved kind of how easy it is to kind of, for lack of a better term, manipulate a group of people. I'm not saying that what the government did was wrong or right, or I'm not making that comment, but it's from an observatory kind of point of view, whereby this way of life that you're so used to in an instant changes
overnight.
I can remember literally coming home from work and not going back into work for 8, 9, 10 months.
Yeah.
And for me personally, not leaving the house for weeks and weeks at a time. Hannah, she worked in a shop, so she went out every day to work, albeit in a, very different world to what it was the day before. But for me, long periods of time spent indoors, and it wasn't that difficult for me as a person who anybody who talks to me would say, oh yeah, he's quite confident, he's quite he wouldn't take any shit, and like that it was done. And I think it's a scarier film watching it yesterday than it was when I first watched it.
Yeah,
and when I say scary, I don't mean like in a horror sense, just in a fucking hell. This could be a world in which we live in.
I think because art, has this thing of, I do believe that, art looks forward, like good sci-fi, so much in good sci-fi made a long time ago you feel like, whoa, like even things like Back to the Future, like Back to the Future 2 feels quite like, it feels kind of like, the Biff character becoming president and having a big tower. It feels sort of similar to a Trump Tower sort of situation. I know it's not the same, but I feel like, the art, and especially sci-fi and stuff, seems to really does look forward in time. And I feel like this movie, it does feel like one of those moments now where it feels like, whoa. If this movie came out now, you'd just be like, oh, it's sort of going for like a weird COVID sort of time frame. You'd be like, oh, we've seen all that.
Yeah, I think
because it's before then, it really just, it's like, well, no, this is its own thing that had its own ideas, inspired obviously by really great literature like 1984 and stuff, I'd imagine. And there's an older one I read called We, which is a sort of a similar sort of world, inspired 1984, this, I don't know if this film necessarily does it like in the best way it possibly could as a movie. Like, oh, I want to see this, but I don't feel like 1984 the adaptation was quite hard to do as well. I don't know if that, I've seen that, and that's well arty and a bit like, I wouldn't rush out to watch that again. But with this, I feel like, it's some quite deep, dark issues that it's done in a way that you could just stick this on anytime.
Yeah, I
think
it's
not too much to swallow.
The biggest difference between this and 1984 is that this is a popcorn movie.
Yeah,
you can sit down, watch it, have a bit of popcorn, and just enjoy it. 1984.
You ain't popcorn in that.
This could be 1984 if you take out those satire elements of it. If you take out the Stephen Fry character and the comedy show. If you take out the charisma of V and make him, just a freedom fighter and somebody who's hell bent on this particular thing, you get 1984 because it has all of those themes. It has all of those, those questions and the rhetoric that's used, but it has everything else where it doesn't feel like, I'm saying 1984 pushes it down your throat, but it doesn't. It's
a bit more abstract and a bit weird. It's all a bit like depressing, isn't it? I think
at its very heart, this is a movie. Yes, 1984 was a movie, but it was based on a book that had, that was written for a particular reason. It was a politically charged, novel. Whereas this is it is a movie, and it doesn't forget it's a movie. It's enjoyable.
Got
to
the
watch,
throwing knife.
Because there are films that are very, very good, but they're not enjoyable to watch.
All I'm saying is I'm glad that the whole movie isn't like the police side quest in this. Like I would like, I don't know, but I think if there was a little bit more heart in the police scenes, I think you're talking about something that I'd be like, Ron, I've seen it 10 million times. Do you know what I mean? I've seen this movie so many times, so good. But I think because the police bits are quite dry, it's so weird. Like it's a bit like this movie. Like there are no consequences. It's all fate. It's like we've had the same conversation about Dirty Harry 1, but I felt like that was coming from you. But now it's coming from me.
I feel like whatever we do next, we need to do a film that doesn't have dry police scenes. It's weird. Just take it on a total sidebar. In terms of like choosing what movies to do next in the podcast, I try to make it so that films are So you know, we're not always doing a horror film, because if you don't like horror, you're not going to want to, you know, tune in. So there's a little bit of something for everybody. But I've found out through doing this and across the odd episodes how easy it is to choose a film that is in some way similar to the film that you've just done. The fact that this also has police scenes, which I agree could get dry. I don't think they are, but I think we're having the same conversation about V for Vendetta as we did with Dirty Harry, albeit from different perspectives.
Yeah, I don't know why this is dry for me and the other one was dry for you, and it's like a reverse thing. So I'm like, Dirty Harry police scenes aren't dry.
What we need is, in Dirty Harry, we need to have Stephen Ree and I can't think of the other actor's name, Rupert Graves, I believe. And in this, we need Clint Eastwood, and just Clint Eastwood.
I think just like I would have liked, you know, if it just showed, I think the police could have been the way you show what the world's like a bit. So the policeman isn't just he's at home, you know, his wife's getting onto him not to go off don't break the rules too much. You know, we live a happy life here, you know, and he's
You're going to ruin everything for us.
He's more wrestling. Yeah. I would have liked a bit more of him wrestling with, you know, should he just be part of the establishment or should he like go?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of that, but the wrestling happens very quickly. He wrestles, should I be having this conversation? And he has a conversation. He's like, oh yeah, I should. It's very. So I kind of get that. One of the things that I do want to mention is during that, you know, that parody TV show where it goes off the rails and Stephen Fry's character has chosen to do his own script. It's funny how they've got John Hurt to look so unlike John Hurt while still looking like John Hurt, because it's clearly John Hurt, but it clearly doesn't look like the John Hurt that we see in all the other scenes. So the point where it is believable that it is a lookalike.
It's quite clever.
It's so, and obviously all they've probably done is just, you know, done his makeup slightly differently, you know, dyed a bit of his hair slightly different or whatever it may be. But I do find that funny when you get in films where you get, somebody's playing themselves, but they're not themselves.
They dyed their beard a bit, a bit different somehow.
Or, you know, they've got a big nose or whatever it may be.
I know Stephen Fry is just Stephen Fry in this, but the film needed a Stephen Fry in this, I think.
He's the perfect kind of character to play that character, isn't he? He's very intelligent, very witty, very funny, and it would be very difficult to find somebody to play that part who isn't as good as Stephen Fry is doing it.
Yeah, it's believable as well if you're English and that he...
If we lived in a world like this, you would have Stephen Fry.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you probably wouldn't have Stephen Fry presenting the TV show because I feel like he just wouldn't do it.
No,
but if he was to do it, it would be very funny and you would feel like, come on, Stephen, whatever you say, I agree with.
Yeah.
You know? He would be the real voice of London, you know, or the voice of Britain. But it is a bit, you know, it is a bit sad that his demise happens, because I feel like initially there's that insinuation, which, because we know that Stephen Fry in real life is gay, we never really truly believe, because when Evey is going to meet him in the very first, or the opening of the film, there's the insinuation that she's like she's going there and it's going to be a bit of a sordid kind of...
She's like climbing up her work ladder.
She's going there to entertain him, a little bit like, you know, with the priest. It's like that. But obviously we find out that he's only doing it to keep up appearances. But we sort of learn that he is a very, you know, he's a very, I suppose, conscious man. You know, he's a very good man at his heart, and obviously we see him get taken by Peter Creedy, played by Tim Pigott-Smith, who plays that role to perfection. The way he walks in and just says, "Not so funny now, is it, funny man?" You know, it's just like total arsehole, total bastard, and plays it to perfection. But because of how good he plays that, is in part due to how good we feel, or how, you know, how much sympathy we have for Stephen Fry's character.
Yeah, no, for sure. You really don't want anything bad to happen to him. And you feel like in his house, she is sort of relatively safe up to that point, I think. What do you think about Natalie Portman in this movie? Just a great casting. I feel like she's good in pretty much everything, to be honest. I feel like she's always she always really sells
she's
it.
one of these actresses who always surprises me. I don't know, I feel like I go into things expecting Natalie Portman to be rubbish. And not because she's rubbish, but just for some reason, always expect her to be rubbish. And I'm always surprised that she's not. Like, a film she's in called Annihilation, which is a pretty decent film. I was expecting her to be rubbish in that. She's pretty good in that.
I never clicked on it. It was on Netflix.
It's one of those films where you have to watch and it's a bit confusing. It's based on a book as well.
One of those thinking man films.
Yeah, one of them fucking weird ones, as my dad would say.
Oh, weird. Yeah.
But yeah, she always surprises me. And then, I think she's good in Black Swan. That's another great film that I like. She's great in that. I can't really think of a bad Natalie Portman film. Probably somebody will be listening and go, oh, it's this. And there probably are bad Natalie Portman films, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's Natalie Portman who's the problem.
I feel like she's always got to. Just we're on the bit in the background quickly, Ryan. You definitely don't see it. I feel like he does cover. Also, it's shown later that he has masks. So I feel like he would have utilised his mask collection. I don't think there is a plot hole there. I think he's such a master of disguise that he's done it for a long time, and I reckon he's pretty good, hiding his face. And he's always blinding her with light in all those scenes.
Yeah, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Do you reckon?
Yeah.
You sure?
I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because breaking the fourth wall here. When you do an episode for a podcast, I'm very aware that we don't always want to just say 100% all the time it's a great film. So I feel like sometimes you kind of are watching things from a slightly different perspective. So you're almost in some ways looking for things to be critical about. And that was probably just one of the things that I picked out. It doesn't change my enjoyment of the film in any way, shape or form. And I think it's one of those things where it doesn't really matter either way, does it?
Is it the same actor doing by the way, what is the actor? Is it Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, it is.
Christina told me earlier it's Mr. Anderson.
Well,
is it the same voice doing it?
So the guy who actually plays him is Hugo Weaving, which is Mr. Anderson from The Matrix.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the reason for that is because it was written by the Wachowski brothers, who also wrote The Matrix. Same production designer as well, Ian Patterson from the Matrix films. But there are some scenes where it's not Hugo Weaving in the suit, because originally James Purevoy was cast, and I've heard some rumours that it was because James Purevoy wasn't the greatest person to be on set with. I don't know how true that is, but generally speaking, something didn't work, and James Purevoy then came out of it. And so there are some scenes where it's not Hugo Weaving in the suit, but he's overdubbed. But Hugo Weaving is the guy who plays V. And I really kind of want to see a James Purevoy version, because I do like James Purevoy's work.
What's his sort of stellar performance to watch him, would you say?
Oh, well, there is a TV show. Can't think what it's called, but he plays a lawyer who gets arrested for murder, and he's really, really good in that, but I can't think what it's called. But he's been in things like Resident Evil.
He's in Fisherman's Friends,
yeah,
which I've seen. I've seen a sequel, so I assume that's quite an interesting one for him. So I assume he's like an English guy.
Yeah, he's an English guy, and he is. Yeah, everything I've seen him in, which isn't a lot, to be fair, I've always been, like sometimes you get those actors where you're like, oh, great, it's got such and such. He was in Rome. There we go. That's his kind of biggest thing. That was a very well-renowned TV show that he was in, and obviously that had, you know, great plaudits.
He's quite a caricature, isn't he, Hugo Weaving? You know, like how he plays V. Like he's very like it's quite silly. Like how do you find it? Because I loved it. But like, do you think that was it's just out of curiosity? Do you think that was a lot down to just his take on it? Like, because it really does poke out the movie. It's kind of probably what makes it memorable in a way. Is his sort of.
I think it kind of has to be because you never see his face. So the vast majority of the acting is done via his body movements, you know, and the mask. You know, the mask does a certain level of acting, but I know what you mean. It dances a tricky kind of, you know, tightrope where it kind of has to be right on the line, otherwise it could veer into being over the top. And
if it had gone fully Christian Bale on this, it would have looked silly when he made the eggs. Do you know what I mean? Because imagine seeing Christian Bale do the Christian Bale. Can you do it, Ryan? You can do the voice for Christian Bale.
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
Yeah, if he did that and then you saw Batman making eggs, you'd be like, oh no. But however, if you saw like Michael Keaton in Batman suit making eggs, I think you'll get away with it. But Christian Bale, you don't want to see that guy making eggs in bread, which I definitely want to try doing actually. But
that's your biggest takeaway is I want to do eggy in a basket.
I've seen it recently pop up on like reels and things of different ways of making egg, and that's one of them. But I think if most of the scenes are him moving around and stuff, I mean, he is amazing, really. I know it's sort of reminiscent of like, you know, Ghostface in a way, the mask, and it can't help but remind me of it. But you know, I wish there was just a sequel to this film. I feel like that's something I keep touching on, but I feel like I wish there were more of this. And you know, Natalie Portman, such a strong performance, like you're saying. I feel like. And yeah, for some reason there is always a surprise as to why it's good. I think it's because she just is. She's kind of
she's just solid in everything.
She's not really a lead female badass in anything, is she?
No, she doesn't do the films where she's not, let's say, and this is nothing against Kate Winslet, but she's not the person who's going to be in those Oscar bait films, although what I said earlier about her shaving her head feels like that type of moment, and then it's not that.
It's Black Swan, an Oscar film, isn't it?
I think it was nominated, but it's not. You know, what I'm saying is when you get those Oscar bait films where they take a very tricky subject matter or a very emotive subject matter, and that is essentially what it's there to do. It's there to showcase this particular performance or this particular performer. You know, she doesn't go for those roles. She does, as you say, she doesn't go for those Charlize Theron, Kate Beckinsale type, you know,
and
female kick-ass type character. She could easily.
She brings that energy to the roles that she does choose, doesn't she? Like, because she's really cool in this, and at the beginning, like, it's a bit of that sort of thing. You think, I don't really ever sort of have her, even when I never really buy her as a sort of scaredy cat individual, and she's not really at the beginning. But
I think the accent is doing most of the work in that way, because it does feel very much like, oh no.
Yeah, but I don't really ever buy her as that, but that's not a bad thing. I feel like she's always. I think it always depends what you see people first in. I think the first thing I probably saw her in was Leon, and I feel like so from a very young age of her, she just constantly always in edgy. She's got edgy movie material. For me.
Yeah. As I say, she just surprises me all the time, and I think that's more coming from my own unconscious bias in that way, where I expect different things of Natalie Portman, and what I expect isn't what I get, and that's a good thing.
Yeah,
you know, it's nothing she's necessarily done. I think it is just sometimes you see, so you know, like you sometimes have irrational hates of people for no other reason, but you just don't like them. You know.
Yeah, usually someone you don't really like someone, and then you're like, oh, I don't really like that actor.
Like the one for me, and this is a deep cut.
Oh dear.
But the person that I have an irrational hate of, and I know it's an irrational hate of, and this person is probably a lovely person, but Do you ever watch Homes Under the Hammer?
I never do. I have to say.
Well, a guy, I think his name's Martin something.
Yeah.
The guy who presents that, I have an irrational hate for. Like, he comes on the telly and I just have to turn it over.
Really?
I don't know why. He just annoys the living shit out of me. And it's nothing he's done. So if he's listening, I do apologise, because you're probably a very lovely guy.
I've
Another one for my dad,
Go on.
and the only reason I'm mentioning this is because every time he's on screen, he mentions, and he tells me this story. My dad, he goes, "See, yeah, John Hannah, for me, I don't like John Hannah, but to his credit, I did like him in The Mummy." That's weird, because I don't like him in anything else, but for some reason in The Mummy, he's all.
Did your mum just watch Spartacus, or did your dad watch it?
Oh yeah, my dad wouldn't watch Spartacus.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, my mum watched. Is that the TV show?
Yeah, John
yeah.
Hannah's
He's great
performance
in that, isn't he?
Spartacus is.
Yeah.
You know what? I'd like to go back to that, because I've never. I was quite, when Spartacus was on, it was all just like sex and violence, and I feel like I was in the time,
which
of
is
my
very,
life.
very similar, because we spoke about James Purevoy. It was a whole host of those types of things that came out because of things like Rome. James Purevoy was in, and it was very much, a very unflinching look at Roman times, and obviously Spartacus came out, and in some ways Game of Thrones became that. Filled that niche where you saw the brutality, you saw the sex, you saw the violence.
Glad this movie doesn't get any grittier, to be fair. How do you feel about that? Because I think it sort of it implies, and it shows, it talks about the things, but you never really see too much horrific stuff in this.
I think it's to its credit that it doesn't do that, because it would be so heavy otherwise.
Yeah.
I think the fact that V is very charismatic is really, really important. You kind of flippantly said he could have done the Christian Bale and done a really dramatic performance from that respect. And if it had been that, you'd have just felt knee deep in this horribleness.
Yeah.
And actually, the beauty of this film is that there's a lot of horrible shit going on. It's really emotional in places, but it's also really funny and charming and romantic. At its very heart, V is a romantic. It's that romantic era of culture, the 16th century, Count of Monte Cristo. The even what he's wearing is a very romantic thing to have worn in those days, albeit it's a modern take on it. But that's the light of it, in terms of the light and shade. Without any of that, it does become a bit heavy and a bit too. Could still be a good film, but it wouldn't necessarily be as rewatchable.
It never it never really ever goes back into the sort of, folky tales of, oh my God, Ryan, it's Guy Fawkes.
Yeah.
It doesn't, apart from the mask and a bit of, he's following his sort of, he wants to blow this, on the 5th of November, blow Parliament up on the 5th of November and stuff. It doesn't really, because at the beginning it starts with a sort of flashback to the time where Guy Fawkes is like being killed, and everyone's cheering that on. And I had just because when films normally show a bit of that at the beginning, you're like, oh, maybe someone's a descendant of Guy Fawkes. Maybe he is. We don't know. But I was expecting like a bit of like, oh, it's sort of world building. It's in this universe. Well, that's obviously quite important. So that's going to come back around, but it just doesn't, does it?
No, I think the point it makes is that it could have been Guy Fawkes. It could have been something else. The point is that, not to keep mentioning it, it's a symbol, isn't it? He happens to wear a Guy Fawkes mask and Guy Fawkes hat, because that just happens to be what he's in love with. And it's a way, a bit like Batman chooses the thing that he's scared of because he wants to instill fear in Gotham.
I've just got it, Ryan.
It's that thing of, well, okay.
He chose fire. That's why. Because Batman chooses the bat.
Hell.
I'm so obvious.
There will be people listening to this shouting at their listening device, going, Why are these guys not picking that up?
Yeah, why did he choose that? It's because he's burnt. That's why he's Guy Fawkes.
That makes a lot more sense. But I still think my point stands where it could be, for him it's Guy Fawkes, but for others, it could be something else. It's
Yeah.
just an idea. We need a symbol, we need something for people to believe in,
But now I see the
V is the
fire.
hero that London deserves, but not the one it needs right now.
But why now I see it for what it really is, as a like a superhero thing, because I always knew that, but now his arc is very much like he's what you would get from a Burns victim person. If they are become a superhero, it may as well be Guy Fawkes, and it sort of makes a lot of sense. But
I'm surprised.
I'm
surprised they never used the song "London's Burning" in this.
Yeah,
because that would have felt like something very easily to slot in and almost be a bit of a motif. That could be the song that keeps coming back and keeps coming back. But maybe that would have been too on the nose potentially.
maybe, but I think stuff like that would be very cool, like a really good version of London's Burning. I think that would have been.
And we are talking about the nursery rhyme, not the ITV drama from the mid-90s.
Why is the wig is so great, isn't it? Like how they've designed this character is just very cool.
He feels very much like a comic book character. Very visually striking. I think they've done a really good job to make him as visually striking as he looks on the cover of the graphic novel, because it could have quite easily, sometimes, not to keep drawing comparisons to Batman, but the bat suit in certain Batmans is great and in others it's terrible.
Stop adding nipples
and unnecessary colours where it doesn't need to.
There's a Phantom of the Opera sort of thing going on here as well. Like he kind of clearly loves Natalie Portman.
There's comparisons. The Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera does have some scars on his face, as does V. You're one step away from going on a riverboat with some candlelight, some eerie music playing. You're not far off.
Would have been good, a little boat scene on the Thames, actually, I think, on this. You know what I mean? Like just a little bit more.
Good, yeah.
See how he gets around, because we see that he sort of jumps over roofs and stuff, but he is the kind of guy that he would use a gondola, I feel like.
Yeah, that would be his mode of transport, wouldn't it? He wouldn't have a car. Excuse me, I need to go by riverboat.
Yeah, he
gondola.
would.
Yeah. You can see him steering a gondola down the Thames quite easily, can't you? He's, as I say, he's very, very visually striking, and in this narrative he has to be, because he has to be something that people can latch onto as a symbol.
It's very crazy, really, that if you made this movie, that whole anonymous thing would come from this. Like all the mask would be used for like all those like online, whole like it's subculture of anonymous, which is probably still going on now. But like for like a modern movie to bring that about, and for people to lean into to actually cause anarchy or whatever. I don't know enough about all that stuff to probably go into
neither do I. I think the thing I would say is it's almost like sometimes a bit of a weird link, but sometimes like what goes viral on like TikTok or on the internet, sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. It just happens to click. And I think here, like, not that anybody would have done this. Oh, we want this to be the symbol of this anonymous group online. We don't, but it could have quite easily been a different face and it not work. But it did work.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that is because, not to take any credit away from the artists or the artist from the graphic novel, but I think there is an element of just total luck with these kinds of things. Let's take another thing, like there's a film by Clive Barker called Nightbreed, and in that, David Cronenberg, the director, is in that film, and he wears this mask, and this is again a bit of a deep cut, and the mask is like a sack with like buttons for eyes and like a zip for a mouth, and it's really quite scary. It's like really like that looks really odd, but it's not it's not remembered in the same way like a Michael Myers is or like a Jason Voorhees is. And I think that's what I mean. It's like, it's kind of luck. Like they're just as scary.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's more scary. but for some reason,
The culture
it hasn't
didn't
clicked,
stick.
and it's not something that's as culturally relevant. And I think here it could have quite easily not worked, but it did. And I think there's an element of, it has to be well designed, yes, but I think there's a big element of luck that comes into it, and you can't really foresee that stuff. You can't plan for that. It's lightning in a bottle. It's stuff that's, unplannable.
I think this is a movie that generally will, I have to say, I'm going to place a bet. I think it will stand. I know it's already a bit older now, but
It's
I
nearly
think
20 years old.
I think it will stand the test of time for a bit longer, and maybe a long time. And I don't know what it is. There's just something about it that I know what it talks about is obviously sort of, but for me, it's not just the sort of political driven or the that sort of stuff that's important about this movie. It just, it's like They Live isn't a great movie, I don't think, but I would rewatch it lots. Yeah, but Ryan,
you've hurt me there.
In not backing myself out of a deep hole, but I would still give that.
It sounds an awful lot like that's what's happening right now.
I a lot of my favourite movies, like Flash Gordon and stuff, I don't think standing up to like Schindler's List. They're like,
I think you're going to watch those films for very different reasons.
Yeah, maybe.
And that may be the first time anybody has used in the same sentence Flash Gordon and Schindler's List.
I just think there are films like...
Are you trying to say that Schindler's List would have been better with a Queen sound?
I feel like this, Shawshank Redemption. Maybe I've just got drummed into my head like the movies that you're supposed to go, God, that's a good movie, like that Shawshank or something. But like They Live has, it has that really prolonged like fight sequence and stuff, which I know you'll love because it's wrestling.
I fucking love that.
Yeah, but
I have like a real sort of like emotional soft spot for Roddy Piper. Like he's like one of there's like some people you just have an automatic like connection with. Roddy Piper is that guy for me. Like many people would have been Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, but for me it's Roddy Piper. Well, it's very difficult for me to not enjoy about a 10-minute fight scene between Roddy Piper and Keith David.
But that movie, what I'm saying is, I don't think it's perfect, and that's all the reasons I like it. That's why I give it like a super high score. Like I love They Live, Ryan. I love John Carpenter like no one else's. I love those films. I like
at the start of the conversation, I was slightly worried.
I love they're my favourite movies. Those ones.
I know what you mean in terms of there's a kind of charm to them, a bit like what we were saying earlier about like crap CGI or rubbish practical effect. There's a charm to them that they're a little bit hokey.
Yeah, and this I think has.
This is just a very
and that's why I think it stands. I think it'll stand up for longer.
I think a lot of it goes back to that comedy show with Stephen Fry. Like it's so over the top, trying to be funny that it's not funny. But that's what makes it funny. Yeah. It's this weird paradox where
he's like whispering, and when he's under,
and it's the facial expressions of Stephen Fry when he's like trying to work out which one is the prime minister. He's like, it's over the top to the point where you're like, well, that's clearly not going to be funny, but it's paradoxically gone so far that it then becomes funny, and it's again you that is a fine line between it just being not funny and it then being funny again.
I guess there's just a chaos to this movie, which is funny. But there's a chaos to this film, and there's a chaos to things like They Live, where it just feels like there's something more historically important about these movies. I mean, that there's a real big good comparison there in a way, because They Live is forgotten, but the society is controlling everyone, isn't it?
Everybody's being controlled by essentially, the advertising and everything. It's a comment on consumerism.
Yeah,
more than anything.
But these, and that, and the world of RoboCop as well. These sort of dystopian, not so distant futures. It's always worth having. Whenever there's a good I think it's really hard not to make those movies a bit hokey, and this has to deal with a kind of like superhero in that world as well. Yet for me, I love this sort of genre. Is far more immersive and exciting for me than just another DC movie of a boring superhero who's just in a normal world, or all the Marvel ones. Do you know what I mean? There's something that's way worth watching for this one.
I think for me, the reason I come back to it is because I always think that the best films, when you finish watching them, do one of two things or both. You can't stop thinking about it, and you want to go and tell the next person that you see, or you want to talk to your mates about it, and he's like, oh, have you seen this? You need to go and see this. Oh, such a good film. You know, that kind of thing. And it asks you questions. So you, like, for example, you watched this and immediately you were like, I want to know a bit more about thee. So you went and asked those questions. And, you know, we're in a world where, well, at the time, yes, there were comic book movies, but there weren't 300,000 coming out every single year. And if you made this now, I think it would get lost in the shuffle, unfortunately. And this is so much more rewatchable than a lot of the MCU, you know. Not to say that there aren't good films in the MCU, because there are good films in the MCU, but they're not, you know what you're getting. And what you're getting is popcorn, sit down, just let it wash over you. You don't have to think about, you don't have to really, you know, question anything in there, really. You know, that's kind of why I think that the Infinity War and Endgame kind of versions of the Avengers are the best ones, because they're the ones where there's real things at stake. There are real questions. There are bold choices. Whereas, you know, when you, let's take, I don't know, Thor: The Dark World, it's kind of a bit like, oh, it's just another Thor film. You know, oh, Iron Man 3, oh, it's just another Iron Man film. Captain America, okay, they're on the better side. It's just another. Whereas those ones, it's like there's something more to it. And here with V for Vendetta, you've got that comic book element, aspect to it, because it's based on a comic book, and there's a slight over the topness to everything without it being too far over the top, where it's parodying something.
It's refreshing. It's in England as well. Like, you don't get as many comic books set in England.
And if you do, they're usually like really make a big point about it being in England. If you know what I mean.
I think as well, like, we haven't seen that many, you know, this is the only movie of this, isn't it? So, but, you know, you could...
If this was made today, you would have three or four sequels to you know, lesser value. But a TV show.
I'm ready for it. Like, I'm ready for more.
Because we haven't got it.
Yeah, because stop making, like, the guys that made the Robert Pattinson Batman franchise. Like, I've sat for it on an airplane. I watched that one, and I finished it when I got home. And good film, Batman film. But it, you know, I know it's such an obvious point, but there's only so many times I can see that need to watch it before I just be like, oh, you know, after you do a few of them, it's just like, well, rather than watching the reboot, I'll just watch the best version of it, you know. Whereas this, I thought there's just a lot of ground that this movie touched on it, and I feel like, you know, I'd be really interested, like you say, to see a different person be the V and see how they'd do it, and I'd be interested in a more fleshed out world, or you know, set in a different part of it has to be in London, doesn't it? But, you know, I don't want to, you know, this has just been less, it's been done less, and because of that, it's better to come back to than 10,000 Batman. Essentially,
we haven't seen Bruce Wayne's parents be killed 9 times. You know, we don't ever really need to see that in cinema again, which is, you know, that's one of my biggest criticisms with Batman versus Superman, amongst many, because that is a terrible film. But it's, you know, it has, we see an older Batman, and we're still seeing him think about his parents who were killed. Like, yeah, I'm not saying it wouldn't affect you, but like we've seen it so much where it's now become an eye roll moment, and it should never be that. It is a massive thing, but it's got to that point because we see it so often. We've seen it so many times, and much like with a lot of things, we see the origins of characters far too much. And here we don't really see the origin of V, and because we don't, we want to know more.
And
we want a TV show, we want another film, and we wouldn't be saying that if we had all of it, because at a certain point the quality is reduced, because essentially at a certain point it becomes a cash grab. And here, and probably because of Alan Moore more than anything, I don't know if he blocked other things, being made, but I would have thought that would have something to do with it. Because of that, we only have this one film. And okay, he doesn't particularly like it and he doesn't want to be associated with it, but objectively, it's a great film. And I think if we had 3 or 4 others, I wonder at what point we would be going, oh, V for Vendetta, the first one, yeah, that was all right.
Yeah.
But the rest of them were rubbish because it's all been tainted by what's come afterwards. You undo all the hard work that you've put, you've set up previously. One thing I do want to mention, because I think it's a really nice thing that kind of furthers that point of, anybody can be V, is at the end when you have those, you have that big kind of standoff between the people of London and the government, and it's all at Trafalgar Square and they're all wearing the V mask and the outfit. What I like is when the bombs are going off and Parliament's getting blown up and it keeps shooting back to the different people I like the fact that it's got Stephen Fry, who we already know has been killed. It's got
it's amazing,
it's got the person who was in the prison who wrote the story on there. It's got the girl who was shot that kind of started the, as Stephen Rees says, in this chaos, somebody will do something and they will go too far. It's got that girl who's the catalyst for this movement. It's got all of the people you've seen, and it's kind of the point, furthers it even more, but for me it's the point of going, it's showing you that those people who have been killed have become martyrs. So yes, okay, they've been eradicated from the world because they're doing the things that you're not allowed to do.
They've been blacklisted, like he says about the music, like snuffed out, but not really.
But in doing that, you're creating a martyr. You're creating a symbol for people to get behind. It's kind of it's that idea furthering even more. And it's just something that they didn't need to do, but it's a really, really nice touch.
And the dominoes, cutting to the dominoes is so cool.
I mean, as a visual image, it's fantastic.
And the one at the end doesn't go down because it's and I don't know if that's the point where he's like, I know it's for like
I think he's the final domino, isn't he? He won't go down because he's the symbol. So even if he's killed, that symbol will live on.
I interpreted it as she's the domino, like because he gives it to her at the end. I thought, and it's her that makes the final decision, not him. And I don't know if that's when he realizes that she's the final domino. But
I think you could look at it either way, can't you? And that's the beauty of it, is that we've spoken about this for over an hour and a half now, and we're having different kind of views and perspectives on things. And that, I think, is what I was saying earlier. The beauty of this film is you can interpret it in different ways. I think the worst films are the films that just...
V's this person, he was the ex-lover of Stephen Fry. There you go.
There is nothing else there. It is just what we're showing you.
In very V style, though. He's like, there are no coincidences. It's all sort of fate in that, and the cause and effect. What's so funny is I was like, I swear there's a movie called Domino with
Keira Knightley.
Yeah, but I was like with Natalie Portman, and then I went on it, and it's the mistake it's the Star Wars mistake. Like the Keira Knightley was the what do you call it? The stand-in for Padme and Amidala. She was the decoy, and then I literally fell for it in real life, and I was like, yeah, oh my god! And all this builds up to that she became Domino, and I was like, no, it's Keira Knightley.
And for the second time in this podcast, without even knowing it, you've hit upon something, because one of the people that they were thinking about having play the role of Evey, obviously it went to Natalie Portman, was Keira Knightley. So somehow you've got like some weird like psychic connection with V for Vendetta, because you're making links to things that are already there without knowing that they're there. So
George Lucas is pretty good at casting those two in.
And it's funny you should say that, because George Lucas almost directed. No, he didn't.
It'd just be like faster, more intense. A George Lucas V for Vendetta movie probably be quite good, because he's quite arty with his sort of films that he doesn't show anyone, apparently. But
as long as it has the side swipe next scene.
To be fair, this movie wouldn't be bad with a couple of side swipes.
It would fit in with comic books kind of thing, wouldn't it? Certainly.
But yeah, Ryan, I love this movie.
Yeah. So very quickly then, let's give this a rating. So 0 being worst film ever made, 10 being the best film ever made. I'll start because I've got a high rating here.
Go.
I've got an 8 out of 10 bones. Skulls even. That's you from last time. Yeah. You referred to 8 out of 10 skulls I'm giving it.
So after watching it today, you know, and it's always hard, isn't it, when you watch something and then we're going to talk about it straight afterwards. So I think I didn't probably have enough time to sit with it, and I think I would have been on a 7, maybe lower, to be honest. I was like, there's some things that bring out a bit, but having it on in the background, chatting about it now, and like the visual, the imposingness of John Hurt on that big screen, like it's a film I will come back to, and yeah, I agree with you. I give it an 8.
I think that's the first time that we've both kind of agreed on the rating. In terms of further watching, obviously we've mentioned some things. So League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is one. Black Swan, From Hell, I think, is another one, and Watchmen, because they're all Alan Moore.
I've not seen Watchmen. I just need to watch that one.
I think Watchmen is a great film. It has some flaws, a little bit too long, but generally speaking, Watchmen is a great film. And it has those kind of same, social commentary themes in there. But again, Alan Moore has basically disowned it, as he pretty much has with all of his work that's gone on to be made into a Hollywood film. 1984 is another one that we mentioned. I think that would be, a good place to start if you want a slightly more oppressive, pessimistic view on this type of thing. How about you? Anything else we haven't already mentioned?
I think we've gone through, and to be honest, I'm going to see what Domino is, because Keira Knightley movie. I feel like we've done them all, to be fair, Ryan. There's obviously lots more out there, but I've never pressed play on the new Joker movie, but doesn't that deal with similar sort of themes of like, have you seen it?
I have seen it. It's good.
You know what I'm saying?
I haven't seen the second one.
Is that a further watching? Should I watch that?
I would recommend it. I'm not sure you would get the same sort of things as you would here. I think Joker is more just, it's an interesting take on an origin story, and it worked because we hadn't seen it 1,000 times like we had with Bruce Wayne. I think they undone from what I've heard, they've undone a lot of the hard work in the first one with Folie à Deux. Apparently it's basically a musical.
Do you remember that movie Shadow Man? Is that what it's called?
Shadow Man?
Yeah.
What do you mean Dark Man?
Maybe.
The one with Liam Neeson?
Dark Man,
where he plays like a Phantom of the Opera type guy again.
Dark Man, no. Hold on. Shadow Man. I swear. Shadow Man movie. Oh my God. It's there is a movie by Steven Seagal called it. No, it's another one, and I've got a bit confused, but there's a film where he has a similar look to this. I used to have a toy of him, and he is a bit of a phantom-y looking character.
You sure it's not the Dark Man?
That looked a bit grim. Maybe it is. Should we just is it the Dark Man?
I think it might be.
At the end, does it have a big zoom out of trees?
I've never seen it all the way through.
Okay,
Big
well,
zoom out of
I feel like
trees.
I've ruined our further watching, but I reckon Ryan. Oh, it is Darkman. I think it might be Dark.
There's
I'm
three
not
of them.
sure.
Yeah.
I might be wrong then. Anyway, no, I have no more further watching. Right.
So, as a lasting thought, anything to say for V for Vendetta or anything about V for Vendetta?
Okay. Very, 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 very.
And we leave it there.
Tyler Durden's Underground Arts and Crafts Club. Meet up with like-minded people just like you. Learn craft skills like soap making, electronics and leafleting. The Tyler Durden Underground Arts and Crafts Club. Coming to a car park near you. Terms and conditions will apply.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Bury Our Bones with Cinema. We really appreciate you joining us as we deep dive into the world of film. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media pages to keep up with all of our latest content and updates. You can find us on YouTube, TikTok and Instagram at Bury Our Bones with Cinema. You've been listening to Jimmy Murphy, Simon Keet and Ryan Etherington. We'll see you next time for more cinematic discussions and buried treasures. Until then, don't forget to keep your bones buried in the world of cinema. And it will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll about and like, if you're talking, when we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird, but I suppose...
Maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds... I was like, I'm going to have to stop it. You listen to it back,
It's a good job I observed that well, wasn't it?